Hello, everyone, and welcome to the July edition of this webinar series on responsible AI, an in-depth webinar series about the responsible design, development, application, and use of AI. In this series, we will discuss a range of topics related to the ethical, accountable, and sustainable use of AI. By doing so, we want to inform anyone with an interest in responsible AI about tools, methods, best practices, and lessons learned. My name is Marieke Peters, and I'm your host for today. I have a background in user-centered design of artificial intelligence, which I put to use in my current role as an analytics translator at Xomnia. Today, we host talks by Joas van Ham and Paulus Achterberg. Joas and Paulus, thank you both for being here today. I will first introduce the first speaker, Joas, and I will introduce Paulus at the start of her talk. Also, if you have any questions during one of the talks, feel free to already share them in the comment section on LinkedIn or YouTube. We have a slight delay in our broadcast, so if you already share your thoughts or questions throughout the talk, then we can start answering them while you watch the end of the talk. Joas is a senior consultant in the responsible tech team at Considerati. He is specialized in new technologies and their impact on users, stakeholders, and society as a whole. As Considerati's expert on AI, he also contributed to the Artificial Intelligence Impact Assessment. Joas holds a bachelor degree in humanistics and a master's degree in political science, and in the past he worked as a research assistant on interest groups at the Antwerp Center for Institutions and Multi-Level Politics. Joas and I got in touch a while ago about the Artificial Intelligence Act that was recently proposed by the European Committee, and that is now up for review and for refinement in the upcoming years. Today, he will give us an introduction to this proposal aimed at the regulation of AI. So, Joas, I leave the stage for you to address the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Marieke, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Today, I will talk to you about the EU AI regulation. Regulation can be a bit boring, of course, but it's very important. I think it means that AI is becoming more mature and societal impacts are getting bigger, and so the policymakers feel there's a need to tackle that. So I hope I will give you some overview of this AI regulation. It's quite extensive, another than 10 pages there around, and people are still digesting what everything means. But I think after this talk, you will get a good insight in what the impact can be for you, for your organizations, and maybe even for the clients that you work for. So I work for Considerati. Marieke's introduction was great. We help organizations navigate the increasingly complicated world of societal, ethical, legal, and public affairs aspects of digitization. So think GDPR, think crazy parliamentarians who propose to break encryptions, this kinds of stuff, ethics of innovation. This is what we do. So we also do legal advice, and legal is important for technology because it regulates how technology impacts our society. And maybe you're thinking, why should we regulate AI? Well, on the one hand, it's very good for citizens, businesses, and organizations. But on the other hand, it creates risks for consumers, users, fundamental rights. And you see some headlines here that are examples of things that can go wrong with AI. And they do. So the European Commission took it upon itself to regulate AI. And I will try to give you the regulation in a nutshell and then dive deeper into the requirements that are being introduced by Europe. So the regulation is based on existing product safety legislation. So this means that unlike GDPR, where there is a business responsible for data and there are rights for users, this regulation takes the approach of a provider, someone who develops a product, and a user who uses this product. And this has some implications for what the requirements are. And you will notice there is very little user-centric requirements here. So it's mainly focusing on people who develop technology and organizations deploying this technology. The Commission divides AI impact or risk in 4 categories: unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, or minimal risk. But most requirements focused on the high risk systems. There's a stick as well. If you don't comply, the fines can get up to 6% of your yearly worldwide turnover. So it's a reason to pay attention, I would say. So there are several categories of AI systems. One category are systems that are completely banned. And these are systems that deploy subliminal techniques that are likely to cause a person physical or psychological harm, or systems that exploit the vulnerabilities of a specific group. So these are systems that maybe discriminate people, try to manipulate people to do something, buy something to their detriment. Other systems that are banned are systems that have gotten quite some attention in the last few years because this Chinese social credit system. So the European Commission proposes that we ban the use of this kind of social credit systems deployed by governments to surveil and control people, to ban them altogether. And fourth, the use of real-time biometric identification systems. So this is not the Face ID on your Apple phone. These are real-time facial recognition systems in the public space, deployed by governments or ordered by governments. So these systems are completely banned. There are some deviations possible in case of big public interest, public safety, but mainly these are banned. So this is quite important, I would say. These are things that Europe thinks we really shouldn't have these in our societies. So these are banned. So no requirements are defined for them. You just cannot use them. Systems that are allowed but are considered very high risks to our fundamental rights are AI systems that are a security component. So maybe adaptive cruise control system in a car, or products that are already regulated by the European Union. And you might not really know what these kinds of products are, but you can think about lifts, airplanes, marine equipment, medical devices, in vitro medical devices. So stuff that's already regulated by the European Union. If these have an AI component, they are considered high risk. So this is interesting, but already in very regulated spaces. What the regulation also introduces is a living list that can be updated by the European Commission about other uses of AI that should be considered high risk. And these are biometric identification systems, but not those deployed on a large scale in public spaces, critical infrastructures, AI used for education. On the first slide, you saw the headline about a British algorithm that gave people or children advice which school they could go to. These are regulated or high risk as well. AI used for employment, worker management. So think about HR recruitment, analytics. AI used for granting or revoking benefits. The Dutchies will know we had some scandals in the Netherlands about social benefits and algorithmic discrimination. So these are considered high risk as well. And then AI used for credit scoring, for access to loans, these kinds of stuff. And then there are systems that are used in my head, it's government use. So law enforcement, border control, emergency services. Where should the police go? What is the order of the first aid at a hospital, for the waiting list? That kind of stuff. So these systems are considered high risk and have extensive requirements. I give you a sample here, but it's really just a sample. So for these kind of systems, you should implement a risk management system where you assess which risks your AI system can pose to others and where you design mitigation measures to reduce those risks. Then there are a lot of data and data governance requirements. So you should register which design choices you made about your data, how you collected your data, what assumptions there are in your data, how they are prepared, which biases they are, if they are aligned with the context where you deploy the AI system. So if you train an AI system, I don't know, in the Dutch province of Limburg, you need to explain why it would still be useful to use this data in, I don't know, Frisia. So these are quite some extensive requirements for data quality, data suitability. And then on the other side, you need to document basically everything. So you be able to comply with the regulation. You need to log what decisions you made, with data, what data you used for that decision, how input relate to output, that kind of stuff. Then there are a lot of transparency requirements, but not transparency requirements like you see in the GDPR, where as a subject, you need to understand how the logic of a decision that is made about you is. This is about, does the user, when he buys the system from a provider, know what the system cannot do and how he should use it. Then human oversight. So whether it's built into the system or realized by instruction of the provider, AI systems need human oversight in some way. And then lastly, accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. So is it robust? Is the system robust enough for inference attacks? Is it accurate enough? This kind of stuff. This is really just a sample of the requirements. To me, it shows that the European Commission really listens to the debate about AI ethics that has taken place in the last few years in Europe. All elements are there. Whether they are put there in the right way is a different discussion, but at least all the stuff that was put on the agenda is present, I would argue. So these are the requirements for high-risk AI systems. In general, so everything I will say now will apply to the high-risk systems. The European Commission proposes or designs a life cycle for these systems. So first, you need to design your system in line with the requirements. A lot more than I just presented, but those requirements. Then you need to do a conformity assessment. So can you demonstrate that you indeed designed your system in line with these requirements? Then your product goes live, everybody's happy, people are using your system. You need to do post-market monitoring. So are there other risks that we didn't envisage that are there, and what should we do with that? That's for you. And then for the wider public, there is an incident report system. Just like with GDPR, we have a data breach notification. You have an incident report system. When you put your AI system on the market, you register it in a public European database, and you report incidents as well. And then when something changes, you start all over. So that's the AI lifecycle very quick. I know you're thinking, oh my God, what should I do? I will give you 4 steps that you can do now. They are easier said than done, but I will present them anyway. First is identify your AI systems. And then maybe some of you thought, well, what is the definition of an AI system? That is very broad. It's software that it tries to achieve a goal, generates outputs or decisions, and interacts with their environment. So potentially very broad. And this software is machine learning approaches, logic knowledge-based approaches, statistical approaches. And I'm really interested whether there are techies in the room who would argue that this basically means any software that is there, or there is definitely some scoping here. But to me, this seems a very wide definition. So first, identify whether you have this AI. Then determine whether you are a provider. So are you developing this system? Even if you are developing this system without the intent to charge someone for it. So maybe you're developing an open source library, doing stuff with partners. You are a provider and you need to comply with the requirements that are set for the provider. You can also be a user. That's the organization or the body that is using the AI system under its authority. So it might very well that if you are a developer of AI systems, that you are, for the systems that you develop, you are the provider, but the tools that you use to develop the systems, you are a user because you use tools that are developed by someone else. So this can be very quicky and tricky, and can also be complicated, that you have multiple roles for the same system because there are components that you don't design yourself. That's step 2. Step 3 is classify the system. So is it a prohibited system? Then just stop. Is it a high-risk system? Then try to comply with the regulation. If it's not a high-risk system, but it interacts with users, you need to, I didn't mention it earlier, then you need to notify people that they are interacting with an AI. You've seen the film Her. That would need a disclosure that, well, you're talking to a bot. And minimal risk is AI systems that are not interacting with users, aren't high risk, are not prohibited, and those are still unregulated. And then you need to implement the measures. And these measures are, like I said, a function of the risk level, the role you have as an organization, and the system-specific risks. So you need to try to envisage what risk your system can pose and mitigate those as well, in addition to the requirements that are placed by the regulation. So what will happen now? This is a European regulatory cycle. So the European Commission has presented a draft regulation. European Parliament and the European Council are now debating and formulating their position. This will take about a year and a half. They very likely won't agree with each other, so they will enter the trilogue phase where they try to negotiate a common position. And then there will be an entry into force. We have a bet here that it's Q3 of 2023. Can very well be a bit later, and then after a year and a half, the regulation will apply. So then you can get your fines. You think that's all, but there's a lot more. AI is obviously in the space of tech regulation, and the European Union and the Netherlands as well are really gearing up to regulate this space. So regarding AI in the Netherlands, we expect the human rights impact assessment to be published almost any day now, with the intention, I believe, to make this mandatory for public bodies. So if you provide services to Dutch governments, you will meet this assessment. The Dutch Audit Service has presented an assessment framework. There was a non-discrimination toolkit for AI presented, I think, 2 weeks ago by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The code Good Digital Public Governance was presented as well. And there are, of course, several legislation, sectoral codes of conduct, GDPR, platform to business, e-privacy. And those are policy instruments that are already live. At the same time, the European Union presents the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, Machinery Regulation, Product Liability, Data Governance Act. A lot of stuff is coming your way, I would say. The pain with these things that are really not aligned with each other. So the concepts are different, assessments are not just really the same. So it can get very complicated very quickly. But that is why in this process there will be a lot of lobbying going on. This was my very quick, very hastily introduction in a regulation that's 110 pages. And I'm super looking forward to your questions about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joas. That was indeed a very quick run through a very large document. So thank you for that. And thank you for highlighting the important parts, roughly, of course. There are already a couple of questions from the audience. So maybe we'll just go to those. First of all, I see here a question by a LinkedIn user. I don't know who they are. But how and by whom will this extensive set of rules be enforced? It's a lot of rules, including a lot of expertise. And I would worry that there won't be enough people with this specific knowledge to actually enforce them within the entire EU, especially with the current growth rate of AI. And I think it's a good question because we already see this happening with the GDPR as well, I think. So
yeah, it is indeed a very good question. I think there are two elements to this. So, of course, the regulation proposes governance on this. So there will be a European board, just like the European Data Protection Board that we have for privacy authorities, where national authorities will sit in. So the conformity assessment, so the supervisors of already regulated products will supervise the products that they already supervise. And for the non-regulated products, there will be need for a new supervisor who has to be established. And I think, so that's the plan. And then the second element that I think is very important, and we see this with data protection as well, there really is a need for people who understand both policy, legal, and the technical aspects as well. Because you can have people there who can talk a lot, but if they can't really audit these algorithms, can't really judge data quality, it won't help either. And it will delay, because for some systems, you really need a conformity assessment before you can go live. And so they can become a real bottleneck in innovating new products, getting new products to market. So very good question and a big concern. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think it's difficult that sometimes if a company decides not to disclose how they use AI, it's very difficult, at least for a user, to understand what's happening and that perhaps they are victim of a violation. When I come at home and I see that someone broke into my house and took all my valuable things, then I know that I've been robbed. But sometimes as a user of an AI system, you simply don't know that someone is violating rules and regulations. So it's also difficult to report.
Yeah, and that's also why you really need to understand this in conjunction with GDPR, because GDPR obviously already gives you many rights that are maybe not enforced in an effective manner, but they are there. So the regulation does not repeat those. So you still need to be notified when data about you is processed, before it's being processed, that kind of stuff. But it's really in general a problem or a challenge with technology, and especially digital technology. It's a bit opaque. So, and that's why in regulation you always have these transparency requirements, information rights, because that's the gateway to understand what's happening to you. Yeah.
Let's see. So another question that is somewhat related to this is by Mark van Meel. He asks how the EU is planning to keep their lists up to date, because it might be a challenge.
Yeah. So these lists. And there's an annex with uses of AI that are high risks. And there's an article in the regulation that formulates a procedure to update these. But what will happen is, because we a priori determine what uses are high risk, so if you're not on the list, you don't have to comply. So there will be incidents there. They will escalate to the European Commission. Then it will take some time, but European time, so maybe a lot of time, to get those on the list. And then you have an obvious rights violation that needs to go to the procedure before these companies need to comply. And from the business perspective, it's also very tricky, because you can have a very nice, happy product, and then some incident happen, maybe with you, maybe with a competitor or in your sector, and you will come on the high risk list. And then you needed to have documented all the design choices. So this is really a problem. And that's why I would argue that it's okay to have a list of high-risk uses, but you should also have an impact assessment procedure to feed into, okay, but you're not a priori high risk, but you obviously are, so you still need to comply.
Yeah.
So they say this is risk-based, but I don't really believe, it can be more risk-based.
Yeah, I agree. So focused more on the characteristics and features instead of a set list that you're either on or off.
Yeah, it's very clear list, right? So there's use in that, and companies understand it's very hard to identify AI risks, right? Because you're looking for unknown unknowns. When have you looked enough? When should you stop? What is just an academic argument? What's a real risk? So it's a very complicated. So I understand this way, but I don't think it's the right way.
Yeah, when you mentioned when there's no interaction with users, then it's somehow minimal risks. But then I thought of this example of a former colleague of mine who worked on robots that actually did maintenance in nuclear reactors, so that people don't need to go into that reactor. But yeah, to me that seems still quite high risk. But yeah.
Yeah. So all systems that aren't prohibited or high risk and aren't even interacting with users don't have any rules. So this would be a safety component. So it would be regulated. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see. A question from the audience. How do current tools like TF extended, I'm not really sure what that is, but help with compliance to these regulations? And are there a lot of gaps still?
So I need to know what TF extended is. And
yeah,
I'm not sure.
I'm not really sure.
I'm going to
me talk about
this. I can talk about tooling. So I think one of the things that are very clear that algorithm registers that are already deployed by public bodies are a very easy way to at least keep the overview. And I think there are, especially for transparency monitoring, you can do a lot of interesting systems. We are working together with engines to create basically the complete framework for this. So because there are a lot of technical challenges, but it's also a governance problem, because in general, how I understand the requirements is just a higher maturity level for MLOps, right? So more documentations, more procedures, less ad hoc, more mature data science, I would say.
Yeah. I'm also wondering to what extent we can already accommodate all the requirements with nowadays tooling, with state-of-the-art tooling. We'll have to see in practice how that works.
Yeah, I think many yes, but there are some. So let me just give one anecdote. The Dutch government has to react to these proposals, right, within 6 weeks, because then Parliament can say, well, if you go to the council, please take this position. And they were like, okay, sounds very good, but basically everything that's important is still a bit too vague. And so there are requirements like your data set always needs to be up to date. I don't know what that means, right? This needs to be operationalized, because if everyone will do what they think this means, nobody will do it right. So they really, if they give these vague or big requirements, they should provide guidance, I would say, because then you will see the same thing with GDPR. People are doing some things for 3 years, and then their piecemeal guidance from the supervisory authorities comes out, and then, okay, we can get this to a new level. But it's, I think as a policymaker, you should really help organizations comply with this, because otherwise it's not doable, and you're not reaching the goals that you made the regulation for, right? If you cannot comply, it's not achieved.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next speaker. So thank you, Joas, and I will see you afterwards in the backstage, I hope.
Thanks for having me.
Let me see. I go back to my presentation. So our next speaker is Paulus Achterberg, and she is a challenge officer at Alliander after having been their director of strategy for over 12 years. She's also a member of the strategy team of the Netherlands AI Coalition, and her primary concern in her endeavors is the energy transformation towards renewable energy. In her quest, she looks for new opportunities to shape society with disruptive technology. And today she will describe the change of the energy system based upon renewables that are going to fluctuate with the weather conditions. As part of this transition to a new energy system, an important choice needs to be made. Will the system be aggregated by a few dominant market players, or will this be an open and connected market with access for all? Balázs, welcome to today's webinar, and the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Yes, I will give an introduction about the change in the energy system, but this is also a reaction on the story of Joas, because what Joas was just telling about this framework is a rule-based regulation, and I heard this presentation before a few weeks ago, and my reaction to it was, it feels like a solution for an ancient time era, like 10 or 20 years ago, because things are changing and AI makes it all completely different. And to understand that, I first want to take you to a future of energy, which is not that far away. It's happening right now. And in that, how the markets change and what kind of impact that can have. Well, of course, we all know there's a lot of wind energy and solar energy coming up in the coming years. In the Netherlands, we just finished regional energy strategies for 30 regions last week, which is a 1.0, which means there will be updates later on. And the question was how to create 35 terawatt hour of energy on land, besides the energy that's on sea already. But part of this changes is well, this wind and solar is still in the fields, and it's a large-scale solar and large-scale wind, which is a little bit strange because you can create energy anywhere, like on your roof or in the walls or in the streets. Energy can be created anywhere, and it's more or less ancient thinking on how we are approaching these changes. So what is going to happen anyway, that the coal-fired plants will switch off and all kind of energy will come on, and not just in the fields, but also in houses, integrated, maybe in cars even. And which means that there will be a lot of places where we create energy, which is not the same as with fossil fuel, that it's always on. It's like when there's sun, when there's wind, there will be a lot. But other things are changing too, the way we use energy. For instance, electrical cars, when you charge them, it's a new type of asset in the network. But also heat pumps are coming up. And this is just for houses, but suppose heat pumps will come up for industry as well, or all kind of other types of heating and boilers and things like that. So there's a lot of devices that will be playing a part in the energy system. And because of that, until now, the energy price was based upon the volume that you use, the kilowatt hour, or for gas, the cubic meter. So it's changing, and it's changing from the volume to the moment that you use it and the location that you use it. Because even location, well, for instance, also last week it was clear that in Amsterdam there's also a congestion area right now. There's so much change in the use of the infrastructure that no new customers can be added to the network until there has been some extra investment in the high voltage network, which means a few years of a lesser number of customers connected. For instance, a supermarket in Amsterdam North, or all kind of applicants for new type of usage in the harbor. Um, and this means that location will be important too, which if you combine it, we'll have millions of devices connected, which produce energy, that will use energy, and new type of price signals are relevant. So business models change. And one of the first one throughout Europe that's coming up in this changing market is called the aggregator. And the aggregator is a type of energy supplier that doesn't sell the energy, but sells the service to change the moment of use. And aggregators normally don't look at the location, they just look at the moment of use. Can switch off devices. It was developed in the demand response type of usage in, for instance, South Africa was the first one, because they had so many swimming pools that needed to be heated that the network couldn't handle it. It was a long time ago. Texas, where air conditioners were very popular and the network wasn't fit for it. So the energy company got the possibility to switch on and off air conditioners. And in this type of thinking, especially in the United States, demand response systems came up, and that has been copied to Europe in terms of aggregators. And some of the aggregators are active and they just switch on and off devices depending on the price. So this is the first type of a new business model that is coming up. And the special thing about aggregators, a few years ago, I was commenting on a PhD on machine learning for aggregators. And what I saw is that you can optimize on the moment of the switching to moment of using energy. If you don't look at the location, you can create a blackout because you can switch on and off exactly at the wrong moments. You can make a lot of money, but switch off the network, and that could even increase the way the aggregator would operate, because there's even more issues on the network. So you get higher prices and can make even more money. So if this aggregator would be a complete AI system, you would get a lot of blackouts. And this is just one example of what can happen if we don't find ways to integrate it more broadly than just on the price signals. Another example in this changing energy is one of the things that's also important in this aggregator role, but becomes more important in smart metering, is that these aggregator can switch on and off a device, especially when it's related to heat or cooling. They want to know when you're at home. And so we come in the private domain and privacy issues. And in the same way, you can look at smart metering. Maybe you remember there was some discussions 5 to 10 years ago, sometimes it's still there, about that the energy company can see everything about what you're doing, what kind of TV you're looking at, etc., what kind of program on TV, which is not true, but these feelings are there. And what we did in the Netherlands, that we have developed a meter that has several gates, ports. One port is connected to a low bandwidth data communication system, which can only get one message a day with the quarterly hours, which is perfect for a backup, but not for real-time switching and measurement and monitoring in this changing energy system I was just talking about. And for that, we developed another port at the front of it, and a user can connect a communication device to the meter and then connect physically to the app that can give access to this market. And what we see is there's a lot of pressure to use the low bandwidth port to do this, and the result, the impact, would be that you don't know what's happening. It's just like well, you can be robbed without seeing it. So this is the type of change that we see that by just one little change from you can use P4 instead of P1, which nobody understands, then suddenly all the data is available for, well, specific suppliers of energy services. And of course, I'm not saying this is already the case, but this is the type of things that happen. And then Joas worked out this, just explained about this framework that he was part of in the EU. And this framework is especially good for this type of situations, because you can have rules that you will not use this data for the wrong things. But I go a little bit further, because well, this is a clear situation where we have a grid operator that's responsible for the smart meter, and then you can have an access to the smart meter, and you have an energy supplier. Somebody develops the software, you can put it in, and it's all part of this framework, and you can look at it. But this is not the way that I think the energy system will go to, because if it's all connected and it's not about volumes, it's about time and place, and we get all kinds of devices that are negotiating on whether they will go on and off in a future system, then we see, well, then it's not very clear who is exactly the provider of the service. So we have, for instance, if you buy a fridge, then this element of connecting to the system can be part of the refrigerator. And it can be a German refrigerator, and it's completely EU connected, but it can also be a Korean or a Chinese one, which is not clearly developed in a good way. Like for instance, the solar panels right now, they have inverters that can be from China or from Australia, and in both cases, before it's connected to the local system, first the data goes to this other continent, and somebody is watching at your solar panel. And in this well, all these devices, wherever they come from, are being connected in a way that they can optimize within the house, within the street, within the city. And we see that well, for households, it's not a very clear business case, but it's in terms of smart home, you see it's already happening. For industry, it's much more logical, especially in the industry 4.0, the 4.0 or X.0. It's more and more connected, not just on energy, but on all kind of materials and planning systems, and also in this there's also this local aggregator function. ESCOs are coming up, and in all this connection, well, you cannot always know what kind of device is actually delivered by whom, and what kind of firmware is on it, what kind of software is on it. And well, maybe you can this robot in this nuclear plant, I think they will know who it's from, but well, not every type of device has the same requirements before delivery. So we are getting to a connected system with all kinds of IoT, with all kinds of software in all kinds of levels. And I think it's necessary that we come to different ways of looking at it. So this is just too difficult to make it completely transparent. And this way of, well, putting solar in the field, this way of centralized market design, which I think that will not last a long term. This aggregates also a centralized market design, and maybe we can keep it that way, but I think these decentralized solutions will come up, and you need to come with something else. And the AI is not just in the IoT, it's in the devices, it's in the connection of devices, and it's in the way they interact. So I think we need new ways of looking at it, and That's two ways. In a way that it needs to be open in a way that, well, if it's centralized and you have one provider that rules it all, and I think that will damage the growth of all opportunities that are there. The framework certainly has ways of not getting things open, and by doing that, Europe will lag behind upon other economies in the world. This was one of the responses on the framework. So you need to have an open system, and it needs to be fair, but it also needs to be controlled in a way that if it's giving bad behavior, it needs to be switched off, and it open in a way that it creates options for all kind of players. And this combination of open and control is what we're looking for. I'll give you a few examples of what needs to be more open than it is right now. For instance, this aggregator role, it's in legislation throughout Europe, the same thing. This aggregator is connected to an energy supplier. There's a balance responsible party. I think it's very technical right now, and only those are the. So this is one of the issues. It's not easy to understand. But in the energy system, you have balance responsible parties. In fact, every household, every company has its own responsibility in it, but it's more or less centralized in a way that you cannot influence it. And it's very easy to open it up, to make it possible that you have your own responsibility in it. And then you have an open market for all kind of newcomers that can help in this application, not just centralized, but also decentralized. And the other one is in charging poles, but charging cars. But we have a charging pole, and there's a service on it. And in parts of Europe, you can use your own card. Your mobility service provider gives you a card, and you can use that card throughout Europe. It works. It really works. I know it. But it's still fully integrated. So the energy comes with the pole instead of that you have an energy contract where you can, for instance, use your own solar panels to charge your car wherever you are, not just in the Netherlands, but throughout Europe. So that would be the way to look at it. And it's only possible if you make this distinction between who's the exploitation of the charging pole, the CPO, charge pole operator, and the one that's organizing the services, and they can give this type of new issues. So if you do it like that, then you have infrastructure, you have services, and between the two, there's a match, both in these aggregators and in this charging pole. This matching is what we call a platform. And we know it because you've been on several platforms today already. And this platform creates the opportunity to have this moment where, for instance, I'm not having it, but suppose I'd have a house where I can put a charging pole on the street, then I could connect my charging pole to the platform, and everybody from everywhere could use my charging pole with the services they are normally working with. That would be a normal solution. And suppose that in this charging pole I do something wrong, then the service provider could see it and then give this signal to the platform and say, oh, this charging pole is hacking it all. So this is a control function. And if this AI connected devices to a platform can have a platform that's also AI connected, then AI controls AI in a way that is based upon principles. And these principles need to be the way of creating regulations. And these principles are like open, fair, and transparent, and be clear about what you do with the data. And if not, then you are switched off. So this is a new way of looking at it. This is gatekeeper function. It's ex ante monitoring. It's also during the process monitoring. It's posterior monitoring on behavior, on signals, on anything. And this would be a complete new way of looking at how to manage AI in a system where you don't know where the software is coming from. You don't know who built it, you don't know who bought it, you don't even know, you cannot even find the telephone number of the company. So this is the type of future we're going through, and I hope I gave some insight on what energy, how energy is changing, and how I think this needs to be solved in the future.
Thank you, Paulus. That was a very interesting talk, and I'm immediately wondering how we can translate the ideas, because it's mostly about uncertainty of a very distributed platform, right? And where you don't really know the individual actors, but you still want to regulate on a system level the behavior of the player, so to say, and force certain behavioral compliance.
Yeah.
So I think it's also very applicable to other domains. I was wondering whether you were also thinking about those, and whether you've already contemplated a broader application of your vision.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether my story was clear enough, because I gave all kind of details very deep into the energy system. Even those work within the energy system can find this a little bit too difficult. But I think this whole idea of that this matching between supply and demand for services, there's this key role, and it's in almost all transactions. It can be done like that, and I think that would be the regulatory mandate to create a role like that. And the principles, well, it's easier to talk about the principles. You can even use the rules to make it easier for self-assessment before you open up your service on this platform, so that you know that it's pretty much okay. But I think things will happen within seconds in the future. And if you start using these algorithms, and then you can make a complaint and write a letter, and then there will be a committee looking at it, and it's months later, then the world has ended already.
I think for smaller types of behaviors, we already do this in financial markets, for instance, where transactions are scanned or screened, and fraudulent behavior is monitored, and then accounts can be stopped, or or bank passes can be cancelled, or so. I think in other areas we may already see this kind of
this
a little bit.
For instance, about this frauds in combination with bank passes is a gatekeeper role that it's for the banks, the financial bank institutes, that they are forced to do this gatekeeper role, and you see it's complex for them. They try not to do too much about it, but then they get big fines. So now I think they're very, very well motivated in doing this. And another opportunity, or another possibility, is to create an independent institute that can take this role.
There's also a question from the audience, and it's an anonymous LinkedIn user, so I'm not really sure, but the question is, what do you think of the uprise of very small aggregators, such as private battery or EV owners, or maybe farmers with a small solar farm and battery? Seems like a lower risk regarding blackouts, and would be an interesting open source project.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I was referring to when I mean it needs to be an open market. Because if you have this long list of rules you need to comply to with this centralized, balanced, responsible party, then even if you would start a small aggregator right now, you would still need to be connected to this balanced, responsible party. So you cannot make any money. They take all the money. And it's not an open market. So exactly this would help the system to make it more stable, and these price differences that will come because of the moment of use and the location of use. These type of small aggregates can solve that issue. But they have really trouble in getting into the market right now.
Do you think that maybe also some standardization or protocolization for individual appliances would work? So, for instance,
there has been a lot of work on this type of standardization, both on the supply and demand negotiation, which is not well used worldwide yet, but especially on the devices, there are some that supports the switching of devices, and there's an update already, or within not too long, that every device also can tell to the system what it will be using in the coming time, in the coming hour, in the coming
or producing,
it's the same thing. It's a plus and a minus.
Yeah, but I can imagine that would help a lot if a solar panel could have some sort of prediction of what it might produce that day.
Yeah, but the solar, we can also we can all predict what the solar panel will do, but what your heat pump or what your refrigerator is doing is more difficult.
Yeah, that's true. It depends very much on what you put into it. When you just did the groceries with 20 cartons of milk that have been standing in the car with 20 degrees for an hour, then that refrigerator is going to work really hard. Yeah.
You have a lot of milk makers in the house.
Yeah. There are no further questions from the audience, or they are lagging behind. So it might be either of those. Do you still have a final statement that you would like to share, or?
Well, this whole idea about rule-based regulation versus principle-based regulation is something to look into, because I think that will help a lot if you look at this type of solutions.
Yes. Thank you. Then we're going to move to the closing of the session, and we'll talk to each other afterwards. Thank you for your talk, Wallace. We have a couple of webinars coming up, but first we'll enter a summer recess. Probably August and at least August. There will be no edition, and potentially also September we're going to skip. Because then in October, we are planning to have a session on cybersecurity, and we are currently discussing with two speakers, and I hope that we can disclose this soon. And I'm really looking forward to that talk. In November, we actually were able to reach out to Philips. They will start talking about their code of conduct of responsible AI and how this is implemented in practice within their company. So we have two speakers. One speaker is more from the usability department, and the other one from the artificial intelligence department. And they will especially go into how this code of conduct is applied in both of these departments, and how they then collaborate with one another according to their code of conduct. So I think this is going to be very interesting. And in December, we closed the year with a session about the auditing of AI systems. So there we talk mostly about governance, but also how you can create this transparency and reproducibility and all the other, some of the requirements that Joas talked about today. So if this webinar spiked your interest and you want to discuss your ideas with us, then please feel free to get in touch with Annemieke Los, who's our CCO. You can reach her through the email address shown on the slide, or simply by going to our website and filling in a form, or leaving a message through LinkedIn, or whatever way of communication suits you best. We hope to welcome you in one of our next webinars. Stay in touch and up to date by following our company LinkedIn page, and see you next time. Enjoy your evening. Thank you.